Hi, welcome on my channel, Aline's Visit. I'm Aline, a French guide, and I'm presenting you places, art pieces, museum, and artists. Today I would like to present you a great creator. If I tell you that she was a contemporary of Isadora Duncan, the great American dancer, but also Gabrielle Chanel and Christian Dior, and that a great designer like Yohji Yamamoto said that he's still chasing after a shadow today. Do you know who I'm talking about? Another clue. Cut the fabric on the bias and not the straight grain. Are you still wondering? Okay, so, without further ado, let me present you the life and the achievement of Madeleine Vionnet. Madeleine was born in 1876 in the Loiret to a father who was a gendarme on horseback and a mother of whom little is known because she definitely left home when Madeleine was 3 years old. Little Madeleine was raised by her grandmother and then she joined her father in Aubervilliers. She was very good at school and passed her school certificate with flying colors at the age of 10. She should have continued her studies, but a seamstress from her father's friend pointed out that studying costs money and it doesn't pay off for a long time. So Madeleine was taken out of school and entered as an apprentice in the seamstress workshop. At the time, being an apprentice meant working long hours, including weekends, and seeing your work not valued at all, even if it was well done. Madeleine married a gendarme at the age of 18 and very quickly had a little girl. As she worked more than 12 hours a day, she entrusted her little girl to her uncle's family. Then the tragedy occurred. The little girl died at her nanny's house when she was only 9 months old. This is undoubtedly the trigger that changed the course of Madeleine's life, which apparently was all mapped out. Madeleine left her husband, her job, and embarked for England. There she was a total stranger, knowing no one there and not understanding nor speaking English. But everything was better than what she had known so far. She found a job as a linen maid in an insane asylum. 1 year later, she was able to integrate the English branch of Jeanne Paquin fashion house. As she had a lot of sewing experience, very quickly she became head of the workshop. She had 12 workers under her orders. She was then poached by Kate Riley, a seamstress of the English high society, who put her in charge of the purchases to be made in Paris. She bought models that would be reproduced at Kate Riley, and it was during one of her visits to Paris that she met the Callot sisters, who at that time ran a very famous fashion house. In 1900, at 24 years old, she returned to France for good. Hired by the Callot sisters, she would later say of them that they allowed her to really approach sewing with the highest request for perfection. At that time, the clientele of haute couture was divided in two worlds. On one hand, the women of the upper society, the Gotha, the royal houses, and on the other hand, the free woman, the demi-mondaine, the courtesan. At the end of the 19th century, the corset was still mandatory in the good society, but Madeleine hated it and had always refused to wear one. When she was poached by Jacques Doucet, another creator well established in Paris, to give a facelift to his fashion house, which was falling asleep in conformism, she banished the corset, the girdle. In short, she liberated the woman's body. The free woman whose profession was to please, even if it meant causing a scandal, would love these creations. Actresses such as Réjeanne or Lantelme, courtesans such as Liane de Pougy, totally followed her vision of woman's clothing adapted to the female body with royal elegance. But there was the reluctance of Doucet's saleswoman, who didn't want to sell Madeleine's creations to their usual customers. In 1912, Madeleine Vionnet plucked up her courage and decided to open her own house. She moved to the 222 Rue de Rivoli, with few workers, and her customers who followed her because her models were unique, revolutionary, with this famous cut in the bias of the fabric. The Vionnet house got off to a flying start, but then came the First World War. The fashion house was put on hold in 1914. Madeleine went to Italy but continued to create models. There she met Ernesto Michaele, better known under the pseudonym of Taillat, who designed the logo of the Vionnet house for her, which reopened its door at the end of the war in 1918. Taillat came to work for her for a few years as a designer. But Madeleine's universe was also represented by a reflection on the geometric shapes of the square, the rectangle, or the circle. She was a pioneer in architectural fashion, which influenced the greatest designers such as Cristobal Balenciaga and later on Azzedine Alaïa, Yohji Yamamoto, and Issey Miyake. She worked directly on a small articulated wooden mannequin on which she applied linen cloth. She created pieces that she then entrusted to her workshops, where the seamstresses drawn a pattern and adapted it to the most precious materials: embroidered silk chiffon, satin, silk crepe, with a clever cutting of pieces that ultimately resulted in clothes fitting like a second skin. 1923 was a year of upheaval, both family and professional. Madeleine did lose her father, to whom she remained very close, so she was now a total orphan. She moved her company to a private mansion at 50 Avenue Montaigne to cope with the significant increase in her orders. While she was about to present her collection at the Spanish court, she met Cristobal Balenciaga, and a professional and personal friendship was born. She encouraged Cristobal Balenciaga, who launched his house in France in 1932. She followed his work throughout his life. The two designers maintained a privileged relationship made of admiration and mutual respect, linked to their common love of the profession of couturier, as well as their love of materials. Both had collaborated with fabric manufacturers to create new ones. Madeleine obtained from the silk workers of Lyon that they modified the width of fabric delivered to her in order to facilitate her creations cut on the bias. The first innovation Madeleine brought to the woman was freeing them from the corset, which she called a medical device that deformed the body. She set women on the path to emancipation and equality. She knew Isadora Duncan, the great dancer, another great lover of ancient Rome, who also enjoyed getting lost in the Louvre department of Greek antique sculpture, and who, in the name of dance, rejected the corset and any hindrance of the body to dance barefoot and draped in an antique tunic. The second innovation was in the backyard of the mansion she rented at the 50th Avenue Montaigne. Madeleine Vionnet had a 7-story building built to house the sewing workshops. Women who worked long hours were entitled to chairs and not stools, as with other designers. The apprentices who joined Madeleine Vionnet were trained not only in sewing but in grammar and arithmetic. Employees were entitled to paid leave and maternity leave. There was also a resident doctor and dentist who treated employees free of charge. There was a daycare for the children, and finally a refectory. Everything was free for the employees of the great boss, as they call her. And it was only in 1923. I remind you that other French workers had to wait until June 1936 to enjoy paid holidays. Finally, the third innovation, and not the least, the protection of creations. Madeleine Vionnet considered her work as a seamstress as important as an artistic work. She could not bear to be shamelessly copied by the department stores. She was the first to rise up against this thief of intellectual property. She wanted to defend her creative work as well as the know-how deployed by the seamstresses of her house. She filed a lawsuit against these counterfeiters, and she won. She set up a real register for her creations, having each of the models that came out of her workshops photographed in front of a 2-side mirror with a serial number. These photo albums are now in the Musée des Arts Décoratifs, Art Decorative Museum in Paris, and constitute an invaluable historical heritage for this period. On each dress, she also featured a label with the logotype, her handwritten signature, and fingerprint. At the contrary of Gabrielle Chanel, who was hoping for the imitation of her own work to create a fashion movement. It should be noted that Madeleine Vionnet never cared about fashion. She always said that she was in favor of the sincerity of clothing. Madeleine considered herself as an enemy of fashion. She viewed the fleeting seasonal whims as a superficial element shocking her sense of beauty. Her point of view was, I don't make fashion. I create harmonies. Gabrielle Chanel called her a witch, barely masking her jealousy about Madeleine's immense know-how as a seamstress. In fact, Madeleine, unlike Coco Chanel, did not need to show herself in every public event of Paris for her house to prosper. On the contrary, Madeleine preferred to work in her office and almost never went out to meet clients. On the eve of the Second World War, when the Vionnet house was at its peak. Madeleine felt that the times were changing and would never be the same again. In February 1939, she had to make the most difficult decision of her life. The lease of the business premises on Avenue Montaigne expired. A financial partner, the department store Galeries Lafayette, became the majority shareholder of her house and wanted her to work only for them. And she was already 63 years old. War was rumbling at the gates of Europe. Her house had already survived World War I, but this time the outcome was less certain. With death in her soul, she decided to close her business for good. She laid off all her staff and auctioned off all the furniture and fabrics. Madeleine's employee, struck by this thunderclap, found a place almost instantly in other fashion houses, well aware of the quality of their work. From then on, Madeleine led an active retirement, teaching her sewing technique in the fashion school of Rue Saint-Roch to pass on her knowledge to future talents. She did not want to be a centenarian, and she died in Paris in 1975 at the age of 99 years old, long after Christian Dior, Gabrielle Chanel, Elsa Schiaparelli, and Cristobal Balenciaga. Madeleine is buried next to her father in the small village of La Chassagne in the Jura district. Now that you have discovered or rediscovered the life of Madeleine Vionnet, remember her when you are thinking about French fashion. And as always, if you are coming to France, to Paris, let me guide you to the museum, the Fashion Museum in Paris, or the Decorative Art Museum. It will be my pleasure, and as always, see you next time.